Good day to you. Today we're going to look at another Matthew, not in Matthew, but Luke. We're going to look at the other man that we see by the name of Lazarus. We talked about the friend of Jesus there in last week's, but now we're going to look at, I guess you could say he's a friend of brethren. You could say he's a friend of Jesus too, but at least he's a friend of God. We're going to look at a story that some people call a parable. But most of my friends that I know that study the Bible well, some of the audience here, they agree with me. They don't think it's a parable because it's not like any of the other parables. It's not called. I believe it's bringing to remembrance somebody that had lived, and somebody that had lived and somebody that had died. I don't believe it's a parable. It's not called a parable. It said there was a man. We're going to look at this, if you would. We are going to look there in Luke chapter 16. In Luke chapter 16, there in verse 19, where Jesus was really talking about in this lesson so far that he's talking about in this part of the New Testament, talking about morally being good. The Jews practice a ceremonial religion. If they ceremonially did the practice, then they thought they was good. Jesus is going to show us, and the Jews also looked at prosperity as being something that showed that God was happy with a person. That prosperity. Some people even believe that today, and I don't think that's true. I know that, a rich man and a poor man can get to heaven. Like one old preacher told me, he said that just more of them poor ones. So more poor people are going to go to heaven. Why? Because there's more of them. I believe that also. But here in the story of Lazarus this day, we look there in 16 and 19. That says, there was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously, or we would say very well, what? Every day. Now notice, there's something we see about this. First thing, he was a rich man, who was clothed in purple. Purple was only that a very rich man. He wasn't somebody just a property owner. He was a very rich man, because purple, the dye for purple cost as much as gold. It cost. This man was wealthy. He had purple, and not only that, but it says and fine linen that was processed and made not from just the felt and the cloth around, but it was something the highest to buy. We would say later on, in a few years after this, we would say silk, but this was the closest to silk that they had. And it says that he fared very well, ate like a banquet every day. Even the poor people, when it came time to harvest, they had a big meal. I can remember when I was young and we didn't have, all the best and all we wanted all the time. Well, we had all we wanted, just may not have been what we would like to have. But I can remember when it was time for the killing of the hogs. Boy, you talk about eating then. We ate. That was the day and the 2 days of fasting. We had, we had the tenderloin. We had the tenderloin and the best pieces of meat for that time. But that's what poor people had, that even then, during time of harvest. But this man was able to eat every day, right? The average person of that day would have looked at him and said, well, he's blessed by God. But then it says, but there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who laid at his gate. That rich man gate, there was a man that was a beggar. Now we can see this wasn't just his occupation because he was lazy. In the Middle East today, there's some people, their occupation is that of just a beggar. Matter of fact, even in America, there are some. But the thing about it is, this man had a reason. It says his body was full of sores. He was sick. Does that make sense? He was sick. He said he was a beggar, but it didn't say he just begged for a living, but he was sore and his sores was there. He was a sick man. It says the poor man desired to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dog came and licked his sores. He desired not for the master's food, but for the master's leftover. He wasn't asking for something that he hadn't deserved. He was asking for the leftovers to be fed to him. This is the circumstance of the two men. The rich man, don't know his name, and Lazarus. It says, for it was, look there in 22, so it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torment in Hades, this is the rich man, being in torment in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. Then the rich man, he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he might dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. Now, there's something we can learn about this very, very plainly. It says here, the rich man looked and he saw Abraham, and notice what he said to him. And he said, Father Abraham. He recognized who Abraham was. This man, this is telling us, Jesus is telling us, this man was a Hebrew. He was a Hebrew. He was an Israelite. Because only the Israelite could call Abraham what? Father. He was a person that knew about God. Now this really gets me when I finally saw this, because I always pictured this man as being someone that didn't know anything about God. He was a rich man. Didn't know. No, this was a man that knew who Abraham was. But he did not do anything about it. He was at the type of religion that he thought being Abraham's descendant was enough. He was a member of the church of the Old Testament. We see this, you know, in Mark 7:21 through 23, or Matthew. It says, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord. What? There is going to be many people, but the Lord is going to say to them, depart from me, I never what? Knew thee. Now, that somehow, I have a little trouble with that, understanding it, but I shouldn't. Because they looked and they said, Lord, Lord, right? But he looked at them and said, depart from me, I never knew you. It's not enough to know Jesus. I know that's going to surprise people today. People say, well, you got to know Jesus. No, it's not enough to know Jesus and know God. You have to make sure that Jesus and God knows you. Amen. That's what we are seeing in this. This rich man, those in his day thought that he was a member of the Israelite nation, what we call the church of the Old Testament, the called out of the Old Testament. But God did not know him. He knew about God. Today, I think we have too many people like this rich man. Now, we go on and see this because we want to get through this thought. He says, he cried, he said, oh, send what? Lazarus. And you know, this would have been about almost equal. He wasn't, he wanted about what he gave Lazarus. Does that make sense? He didn't ask for a jug of water. This man was smart enough. What did he give? What did he give Lazarus? The crumbs? What did he ask for? The crumbs or the drop? But notice, God was not going to let Lazarus go to hell for the benefit of that man. It says, then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he might dip the tip of the finger in the water, cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, son, boy, now look at this. He said son. He didn't say sinner. He was a sinner. He was lost. But he's a son that had chosen to be lost. He said, son, remember that in your lifetime you received good tidings, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. What? He said, you receive. This is going to surprise some people. Christ does not promise us, God does not promise a Christianity richness. There was a preacher up in New York City back 20, 30 years ago that drove basically a gold-plated Cadillac. He said, God had promised you riches, just come to... No, God doesn't promise you riches. You can have riches. Matter of fact, it's easy to have riches and go to hell. You can be poor and go to hell also. But the thing about it is, you cannot go to heaven if Jesus and God does not know you and know what you have been doing. Do you know, and does he know you for who you are and what you are? And Abraham said this. And then it says, beside, in verse 26, he goes and says, and beside all this, between us, Abraham was talking. He said, beside us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those who from there pass to us. What? I hate to tell you, but there's some religious that believe that a person can be prayed out of where this rich man was. We can't be prayed out or paid out. We can't do it. He said there's a great gulf, and you can't go from one to what? From one to the other. And he says, and beside all these, there is between us a great gulf fixed. That's what he said. Then the man said, he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house. First he worried about himself. Then he got to think, well, send him to my father's house. He wanted what? Lazarus to go to the father's house and warn them. For I have 5 brothers, that he might testify to them, lest they also should come to this place of torment. But then Abraham said to him, they have Moses and the prophet, let them hear them. And he said, no, Father, Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will what? They will repent. The rich man had the writings of Moses and Lazarus. They had all this. He said, yes, but if one come from the dead, then I'm going to say this. I pray that man was right. But most of the time, probably a lot of time he wasn't. Because look, he said this. He said, the rich man said, if somebody goes to him from the dead, then they will hear. 31, but he said to him, if they do not hear Moses and the prophet, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the what? From the dead. I would tell you this. I'm happy to say, according to history of Josephus and some of the others, historians of the first century, in Jerusalem and around in Judea, after Jesus rose from the dead, they do say that about 50% of the population came to Christ, repented of the sin, and was baptized. Now, the sad thing is, from what Now this is just estimate, don't hold me to it, but estimate I've read said that probably 25% of the Jews in the world of that day converted to Christianity. Somebody said, you said 50, and well, that's probably because many of them saw Jesus. I mean, we got to remember 4,000 and 5,000 and others saw Jesus, right? So they had people they could go and talk to. So half. I don't know what happened to this rich man's. If he's, I just don't know. I can pray. I do know this. I know of families. I know of very few families, if there's 5 or 6 of them, that all of them came to God, came to calling, to being baptized and being faithful. A few, I know there's some, but the thing about it is, there's very few. You know why and what this teaches? Every person has an individual choice to make. That rich man thought about his choice too late. He thought about his brothers too late. If he would have talked to them before he died, he probably could have reached some of them, don't you think? But he waited too late. Waited too late for himself. He waited too late for his family, for him to have the influence that he could have had. And I got to ask you, and I got to beg with you, plead with you, don't you wait too long on yourself, and don't wait too long to talk to your family, to your friends, because we don't know when we will leave this world. God be with you till we meet again.